The ghostly vanishing veteran presented by Absolutely Haunted. It started with a reflection in the mirror. Just a flicker in the corner of my eye. A brief glimpse of someone standing in the main library. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. The library is spooky when no one is here. The frigid temps outside were causing the cold air. That's how I explained the goosebumps, the chills I was suddenly experiencing. But then the shadow appeared, flitting across the frosted glass window between the main library and the children's area. No, when I saw that, I knew. I don't know when or how it started. It was not this way yesterday. So what changed overnight? Where is that frigid chill coming from? It's not the type of cold that comes with winter weather either. It's the kind you get when you're near something unnatural, paranormal, when those shivers raced up my spine. Well, that was the moment I knew our library was truly haunted. The library in our town has several branches. The one I work at is near our local mall and a busy shopping district. Unfortunately, we also have a very severe homeless population, and it is not unusual in the bleak, cold winter months for these unfortunate people to spend their days within the library. Mostly they are quiet and peaceful. We have had a few problems, but luckily these have been few and far between. Weeknights around 9 p.m. usually find us herding everyone still at the library at closing time out the door, and we don't reopen until 8 a.m. the next morning. But just like clockwork, 8 a.m. always finds the usual patrons standing at the door, biting at the bit to be allowed to enter. It is the same every morning. The cold drives them to us in the winter, and the heat extremes drive them to us in the summer. One of our daily visitors and I have to say favorite person out of all of them is an ex-veteran who had served in Vietnam. His name was John. I have to admit the guy was one of our favorites, as he was always respectful and would offer to help you with pretty much any task, and he never asked for a thing in return. A few times over the years when the winter weather or the summer heat was going to be too extreme, those of us working at the library would throw our money together and get him a hotel room at a local place. Danford, my boss, set up an ongoing arrangement with John, who has always been eager to help. No matter the task, whether it's changing light bulbs or cleaning out storage areas, John never hesitates. He simply enjoys feeling needed. Since we can't pay him with library funds, Danford came up with the solution. He asked John to set a price for his tasks, and after completing 2 or 3 small jobs, Danford would reward him with a hotel stay and his favorite food, pizza, paid for out of his own pocket. Today, John was supposed to clean out a storage room, a big task, so Danford planned to compensate him with a hotel stay and pizza for a day's work. But as closing time passed, there was no sign of John. Strange, but not entirely unusual. He always assured us he could take care of himself. Still, I couldn't help but hope that wherever he was safe and warm. The next morning was bitterly cold. People were having car trouble all over. The slick streets had put many people in ditches trying to get to work. It was tossed around that perhaps we should close the library for the day. I only lived a couple blocks from our building, and my house was on an emergency snow route. I had already seen the plow pass my house. Over the phone, Danford and I spoke about the homeless who usually gathered with us on bad days, and I told him I could easily get in and I would open the library. He told me he would come in too. He would be there just as soon as the plow passed his drive. I could not in good conscience sit in my nice, warm house, knowing that 2 blocks away our homeless friends might be waiting outside the library for temporary shelter from the bitter cold. As I drove into the parking lot, I realized to my shock that it was empty. No one was waiting outside like usual. I was not expecting that to be the case, but I figured wherever they had managed to find a place to hole up to keep warm, they had decided not to leave and venture out today. Who could blame them? I had overheard a conversation by accident a couple of days ago. That kind of gave me some idea of where the homeless patrons might be. It seems that they, as a group, had found a secret way into the basement of our local mall. There was apparently a hidden storage area. It was deep in the bowels of the place, that was either forgotten or just not used anymore, and many of the people who came to the library were going to risk trying to stay there during these extreme temperatures. I overheard one of the younger girls tell her friend, "You might get caught and arrested for trespassing, but you will surely freeze on the streets. Jail or basement, either one you wouldn't die. I saw her logic, and right or wrong, I pretended I had heard nothing. It was unfortunate, but the town was not taking our homeless problem serious enough, and there was not enough shelters to house everyone. So I decided that was most likely the safe place they had decided not to leave, which meant most likely they would desert us today completely. I turned my key and heard the lock disengage. Making my way inside, I hit the overhead lights and took my things to the checkout desk where I would be stationed today. I didn't notice the cold right away, but I did notice that there was a feeling in the room. For some reason, I almost felt afraid. That did not make sense. I have worked in this building for 8 years and have never felt anything like that before. I went to the staff room and prepared some coffee for myself and anyone who might be foolish enough to try and make it in today. As I left the staff room, I caught sight of a reflection. I am certain I saw it. A shadow, tall, unmistakable, reflected in the mirror on the wall across from the staff room that reflected the main library floor. Someone, a man, was in the main library. I turned quickly, heart pounding, and stepped onto the main floor. The shelves stretched out, towering and dark, but the space between them was empty. My breath clouded in the air, and a deep, instinctual unease settled in my chest. Maybe I had imagined it. Surely it was only a patron and they would come up to the desk with a book to check out any minute. I hurried over to the circular checkout desk. They had disappeared into the stacks and I could not see anyone browsing the shelves. No matter. I picked up the children's returns and began processing them. It would keep me busy until the patron was ready to process their books and leave. 20 minutes later, finished with my returns, I placed them on a cart and began rolling them towards the children's library room. The children's room featured a large frosted glass window that separated it from the main library. A decorative barrier that allowed light to flow freely while maintaining a sense of warmth and seclusion. The gentle diffusion of daylight gave the space a soft, almost dreamlike quality, making it the perfect retreat for children to immerse themselves in story time or whatever event the library had planned. With no windows to the outside world, the room might have felt closed off, but instead, the clever design ensured it remained bathed in a quiet, natural glow that lit the way for imagination within the hushed corridors of the library. I was pushing the cart toward the frosted glass window, the quiet hum of the heating ducts pouring out that delicious heat, filling the stillness around me. I was just a few feet away from the window, preparing to enter the small corridor that led to the children's room entrance, when I caught sight of the unmistakable shadow of a man moving swiftly on the other side of the glass, his figure gliding past in a hurried stride. The shape was crisp against the glass, a fleeting silhouette swallowed by the dim glow beyond. My breath hitched. A cold chill swept up my body from my heels, and before I even realized what had happened, my flight or fight kicked in, and I chose flight. I stopped abruptly, my fingers tightening around the cart's handle briefly. Then, even before I realized what I was doing, I ran. I left the cart sitting right there in the middle of the room. It was all I could do to stifle the scream rising within me. Some part of me, some instinct I did not even know I possessed, was telling me to get away from that thing. Thing? The same instinct knew that whatever that was, it was not a human. My mind thought crazily as I ran back to the circular desk and the huge windows that allowed passers-by to see into the library. Fear gripped me when I realized there were most likely not going to be any passers-by today. My heart pounded, each beat a deafening echo in the silent library. I saw no one. I found no trace of another presence. And yet there had been a shadow, moving with certainty, as if it had always been there. Maybe it was a person, but if it was, where had this person been hiding? Had they been watching me? Waiting? To say I felt unsafe would be an understatement. A deep, gnawing fear wrapped itself around me, cold and relentless. This wasn't just unease. This was terror. Whoever or whatever I had seen, they had gone unseen for too long. And now, I was certain they wanted it that way. I was trying to decide if I should call the police, but what do I say? Oh, excuse me, I work at a public library, but someone is in here with me? I would sound insane. And I was frightened in that moment worse than I have ever been in my life. I was frozen, not sure what I should do. I looked over at my book cart, and the thought crossed my mind that I should retrieve it. But at that moment, I made the decision to abandon my cart of children's books completely. There was no way I was going anywhere near that area. They could sit there all day for all I care. From the desk, I had a complete line of sight with the door to that room. There would have been nothing anyone could have said or done that would have convinced me to walk down that tiny hall and enter there alone. That room had one way in, one way out, and no windows, so whoever that was must still be in there. I took out my phone and placed it next to me for easy access. Sitting on the edge of my chair, I was pretty much terrified and yet so happy the desk was so near the front door, just in case I had to bolt. Within moments, I saw headlights coming toward the library window in the overcast gloom. I was so happy when I realized it was Danford. He had made it. Hooray! I was alone no longer. He gave me a lopsided grin after I tried desperately to explain the strange intruder. "You sure you're not imagining it? It is spooky weather and you were here alone." "No." I felt indignation rising in me. "I saw him. In a way." Danford looked perplexed. "In a way?" he repeated. "What does that even mean, Cass?" I told him what I had seen first with the mirror, then with the children's room window. "I am sure I saw someone." "Well, come on then. Let's go." He was motioning for me to get up and follow him to the children's room, which I did while cautiously looking about the empty library. I had not seen anyone leave the room since I fled. So if someone had been in there, they still should be. Together, we eventually combed through every inch of the building. There was no one to be found. Other than Danford and myself, the place was empty. I finally reclaimed my cart and reshelved those books. Danford went to his office to get started on his day, and I returned to the desk near the big glass window at the front of the building. I spent the time sitting there trying to figure out what I had seen. About 2 hours had passed when Danford came up from the back of the building and said, "Hey, Cass." He spoke low, unlike his usual confident tone. I looked up at him. "I found your visitor," he said. "What do you mean?" I was pretty interested. "It's just John. I just saw him come into the men's room while I was in there at the sink." He ran his hands over his arms to warm them. And just a side note, but why is it so cold in here today? I have had goosebumps since I walked in the door. Danford leaned down on the desk and spoke in a whisper. "But I think something is wrong with him, though, because he just walked right past me and never acknowledged I was even there. I tried to talk to him, but he ignored me, entered the stall, closed the door, and locked it. Keep an eye out for him, as I think he might be having some sort of mental health issue. John is not acting like his normal self at all, and frankly, I am a little worried." Danford said he needed to get back to his office, but if John came in to call him immediately, he would come back in, so I was not alone with John if something was wrong. At lunchtime, I got up to go to the break room, as normally I would eat at the desk. But since there was no one but Danford, myself, and possibly John in the building, I was pretty sure I had time to go eat my lunch in the staff room. The likelihood that someone else would come in, with the weather being as icky as it was unlikely. I had just settled down at the table to eat my meal. From my chair, I could see into the hallway. I watched John walk past the door, as if he was headed to the bathrooms again. There was no, "Hey, how was your day, Miss Cass?" There had been no, "Sure smells good." Yes, Danford was right. Something did seem to be wrong with John. A few minutes later, Danford walked in. I told him that I had just seen John too. He went down to the restroom to check on him, but returned saying he was no longer in there. "I wonder what's up with him," Danford said before pointing out. "Usually he has tons to say." I agreed that John was acting pretty odd. He was demonstrating none of his normal behavior. After my meal, I returned to my desk and found myself curious when I noticed a patrol car headed across the empty parking lot to the front of the library, its wheels sliding a little on the icy spots. A tall young officer jumped out of his car, leaving it running. He pulled open the big glass door and walked in, shaking the snow off his hat and brushing it off his coat. The officer seemed full of conversation, wanting to talk about how cold it was and what emergencies they had to contend with this morning. Danford, having seen the officer drive up from his office window, had come up to the main room to join us at the front desk. I mouthed the words, "Did you call him?" at Danford, behind the police officer's back. Danford shook his head. No. Seconds of small talk passed, and it grew obvious that the officer was clearly scanning the building. I was staring at him, just waiting for him to get to the point of why he was here. "Do you have any homeless in today?" he questioned. "Not really, not today. Seems they found someplace warm to hold up. There is one guy here," Danford said, "but we're not sure where he is." "What do you mean you don't know where he is?" the officer asked us. Danford rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, he's a regular here, but he is acting kind of weird today. He won't even speak to us when we see him." The officer nodded and clicked his tongue, giving Danford's words a moment of thought. "Well, if that is going on, let's spread out and find him because the city has sent us out to find any homeless we can. We've set up a temporary shelter in the courthouse basement after what happened 2 nights ago. Anyways, if this guy is acting abnormal, maybe he needs some help or something." "What happened 2 nights ago?" both Danford and I said at the same time. The officer perked up as he realized we had not heard the news. "Oh, you haven't heard?" "Heard what?" I asked. "They found that old homeless vet frozen to death behind the department store early yesterday morning. I guess he died during the night from the cold. He had tried to make a shelter in the alley, but it wasn't enough. The cold must have got too much to bear." Danford and I both jerked our heads up and looked at each other. Both of us were in shock. "Well, come on, let's find this guy." The officer was already looking around the stacks, unaware of what we knew. "I got a few more places to check after I leave." I think you can go, officer," said Danford. "What do you mean?" "Hey, that guy might be all right for now, but when you all close the library tonight, he is not going to make it out there." The cop was looking at us as if we were complete morons. It must have sounded so heartless coming from us after the news he had just shared. "Well, you see, officer, that's the thing. The guy that we have been seeing today is the vet, John." The officer started to laugh, as it surely that was impossible. "The poor old guy is laying down at the morgue. You people are." Danford cut him off with a curt, "Listen, you can laugh if you want, but we've both seen him wandering all over the building today." "Maybe he came here after he passed. I don't know how those things work," Danford cried. I added, "He was happy when he visited. Maybe this is where he wants to be." Even today, every now and then, we here at the library get a brief glimpse of our guardian John walking the halls. A shadow that glides across the walls, a glimpse in the mirror, and sometimes on the cold, snowy days we even find an icy handprint or two where they don't belong.